So last time on the show, I went over Spy Hunter, which is my all-time, well, one of my all-time favorite arcade games. And I mentioned there's a sequel, it was 3D, it wasn't that great, Spy Hunter 2. And so today I brought RoadBlasters to review. And RoadBlasters is basically the behind-the-car 3D sequel that Spy Hunter deserved but didn't get. And the Genesis edition is a very good port of it. But I also brought the Lynx version because it's also really impressive, especially for 1990 when it was released. But we're going to start with the Genesis version. RoadBlasters boots up with that radical ZZ Top meets Huey Lewis music. Interestingly enough, that's the between level music, and that's not the RoadBlasters theme, and more on that later. So you begin the game, and in true Atari tradition, it asks you to choose your wave, kind of like in Tempest. And if you choose a higher wave, or higher rally, I think they're called in this, you get more bonus points if you can beat that stage. And I believe that RoadBlasters has 50 rallies to beat, and each one is fairly short, with a midpoint that refuels you, your main tank, and a finish line that, of course, refuels you and also fills up your reserve a little bit based on your score during that stage. Exploding doesn't cost you a life, but it does cost you gasoline, and that's basically your time limit right there. You don't have lives in this game. But you will game over if you don't reach the next checkpoint in time. And the reserve tank is also quite important. You can refill that at the end of every stage, and it refills based on how much you scored during that stage, which makes the multiplier really important. The multiplier fills up when you hit enemies without missing. Every time you miss, it goes down by 1, and every time you score a hit, it goes up by 1 for a maximum of 10. Similar to Spy Hunter again, RoadBlasters uses music cues to great effect. As you approach the end of the stage, the drum beat starts playing, and it's really intense when your, fuel gauge is getting really low, and you know that the finish line is coming up. And as you slide your car sideways into the finish line, that pulsing music kicks in full blast. Unfortunately, the RoadBlasters on the Genesis does not have the digitized speech of the arcade, which is really cool and adds to the atmosphere as well, especially when it says things like, "Eat lead." If I remember right, RoadBlasters just has those 2 warp zones. Also, like Spy Hunter, RoadBlasters has that aircraft that drops you a weapon, only you can only hold one. And in Spy Hunter, of course, it's a weapons van, not a weapons airplane. But that's a lot about RoadBlasters' style. How does it really play? Especially in the Genesis, where the arcade one had one of those yokes, kind of like Spy Hunter, with this really wide range of movement and very delicate movement where you could really precisely aim to increase your multiplier. And, if you turn it too fast, you'd spin out, etc. So it doesn't really emulate very well either. And that unfortunately goes for the Midway Treasures pack as well. It doesn't really play that well, plays very slippery. While the Genesis one, fortunately, controls very tightly. I'm able to snap off shots to the left and right with a lot of accuracy. You might have also noticed that in this version of RoadBlasters, you have lives, and in the arcade original, one gas tank was 1 credit worth of play. So, you know, you run out of gas and you put in another quarter. In this one, there's no continues, you just have 4 or so lives that you're expected to beat the whole game with. And that's pretty fair, it works out pretty well. I've gotten pretty much to the end of this version of RoadBlasters, so the balance to me seems pretty good. Now let's go over and see how the Lynx version compares. I have to apologize beforehand for the sound quality on this segment. My Lynx's capacitors are kind of dying, so it's probably best that I just recorded this audio with the camera. So the first thing you might notice is that RoadBlasters for the Lynx starts up with the RoadBlasters theme that happens on the arcade one when you leave the machine running long enough. And that song in particular did not make it to the Genesis version. So we're off to a good start here. It's got the warp screen and it has the nice, fast, and smooth behind the car 3D scrolling that you find in the arcade and Genesis versions. And the game looks much, much better in person than it does on the camera. Because screens like this or the Game Gear or Game Boy, these really old LCDs, they're really hard to capture. But in person, you can pretty much see everything you need to see with a couple complaints in this one. I think they could have maybe made the mines a little bit more visible. I mean, these are hard to see in the arcade one. And in all versions of RoadBlasters, you're alerted to the mines with the mine light that starts flashing. And of course, in the arcade one, it says mines ahead, but it doesn't say that in most of the other ports. The Lynx one does, though, have speech, which is really cool. My other complaint has to do with the turning, and I don't know if it's the small resolution, if it's the number of frames of the car, or if I'm just not used to it. I was more easily able to nail targets in the Genesis one, but of course I did spend a lot more time playing the Genesis one than the Lynx one, so it might really just be that I'm not used to this. My last complaint about the Lynx version of RoadBlasters, it doesn't have the right between level music. It uses the level select music, which doesn't really feel right, especially after the drum beat and, you know, you're running out of fuel, you slide in, and it goes to the kind of that more mellow tune. It's a bit odd where the Genesis and arcade ones had a few different variations of that between level music, and it worked out really well. This one, a little bit less dramatic, but that's not the biggest deal in the world, and it does play quite well. I mean, all the levels are here, the steering is here. I think it even has a few gameplay elements not found in the Genesis one. For instance, in some of the levels, the cars zigzag, and I don't know if that's in the Genesis one. I don't remember. Maybe it's in hard mode on the Genesis one. I don't know for sure. If you do know, leave a comment below. But yeah, RoadBlasters on the Lynx is quite an achievement. It controls pretty well, it's fast, it's smooth, it's responsive, it's got all the elements you'd expect from RoadBlasters, pretty much, except for, you know, the music is a little bit not super awesome. But for a 1990 handheld release, it recreates the arcade game shockingly well. To be honest, you can't go too wrong with either of these versions of RoadBlasters, and I think the Genesis one is the best way to play it at home, and the Lynx one's the best way to play it on the go, really. And if you've never played it, pick one of these up. It's a really cool hybrid racing combat game, and there aren't that many games that play like this. Actually, I can't think of anything else that plays quite like RoadBlasters. Anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up this edition of Cool and Unusual Games. I'll see you next time.